Okay, well today we're going to do a quick tutorial on exterior rendering and producing maybe some daylighting, as well as making sure you get some entourage and some of those things shown so that you can begin to produce some images that are a lot more reminiscent of realistic architecture. These will also begin to kind of create some excitement for your project, and that'll be an area where you can start to improve by adding more and more detail and more components to your design. That's really the difference between a good and a bad rendering, is the amount of entourage or components and the way in which you create the lighting and the camera. So we'll talk about those today. As you can see, I've got my basic 3D view open. I'm showing materials on a realistic level, so these are the actual materials I've been applying from our site with this landscape, as well as a lot of extra components to add to some of the design. So to begin your rendering, we'll start off with just a base rendering so you see where things are at. We first want to turn on our shadows, which are this little button down here. So we want to turn on our shadows, which gives us some sun angle, right? But you can change that or update it based on this next step. So you always want your shadows turned on, which is down here. And you also want to consider, for the time being, to turn on your sun path. Your sun path is the way in which you understand your building's relationship to the sun. So once you click this, you're going to get this message. It says, your sun's not displayed because it needs to know, where is your location? Because we can actually specify where our house is in the world, what the date is, and what time of day it is. And we're not going to go too far into that. We'll talk more about that in more advanced sessions when you do more realistic geolocation. So right now we're just going to use our specified lighting location and date and time, and you'll see why we can change this in a sec. So I'm going to turn on my sun, and when you turn on your sun, we can take a look here at what we got. I'm going to zoom out and kind of give you a sense of what we're looking at. So down here you have of course your cardinal directions, your north, south, east, west. So right now the house is oriented kind of on the cardinal plane, right? We've got our east side of the house, our west side, north, and then south side as well. In relation to that, on this cardinal directions, we have a sun path, right? And this sun path is driven by a time of day, a time of year, and then also a time that we can change here for the sun location. Because right here it shows you when sun up and sun down is for June 1st, right? If we change this to December 1st, right, notice the sun moves, just like it does in real life. In the winter you get slightly more shallow sun, and in the summer you get that higher, more hot sun. So we'll maybe stick with somewhere like you have before, and you can try different ones. That's the whole point of this exercise. You can click here and change the date, and you can change the sun to be wherever it's at in that time of year. As the sun gets higher in the summer and we move back. These are where you have summer and winter solstice. So I'm going to stick with something that produces a more dramatic shadow. So the main goal here being that you want to get as dramatic shadows as possible. So we're going to do one more step here before we run a test rendering, and I get you into that. We're actually going to take this view and we're going to align this view to a cut in the building. Like, we're going to make it look like this is a section and a 3D view. So if you go to your floor plan, alright, let's go to our level 1 floor plan. You'll see I've already got a section here, but I'll go ahead and create another one. So you go up here to view, you go to section, and we're going to cut a section. I'm going to cut one through this stair in my house. Just like this. Click once, click again, and now I've got a section view. If I double click on that arrow, I'll see all that nice cut and all my levels, and even these bollards that I need to place a little better. Something like that. This guy is supposed to be over here. Okay, so we've got a section. So now I'm going to go back to my project browser. I'm going to right click on my 3D view. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to rename this 3D section. and say OK. And then I need to get rid of these silly characters. Okay. Now, it's not a section yet, and here's one of the best, my favorite parts about Revit. You can take this view cube, and if I right click on the view cube, I can orient my 3D view to a 2D plan or a 2D drawing. So here I can orient to my section 3 and watch what happens. Well, it cuts into the house. If I hold shift and click my middle wheel, I can start to cut through the house, turn in 3D, and you can start to see only a section of the house is shown. That's because this box right here is what we're showing. So I'm going to go ahead and stretch this box out by grabbing these handles to kind of give a sense of where everything is. So I'm kind of pulling this off to the edge so we can get all of our sight. And now you'll notice everywhere I'm cutting into the earth, it's solid black. And you can even see in here where I've started to have these skylights. They'll actually show inside. And of course I can keep moving this box in any direction to kind of get more or less of the view I want. So I'm going to maybe stick with something like that. And then now I'm going to go back and change my time to have some really low shadows, low sun. Notice how I'm getting these really long shadows into the interior space. And then I'm going to change the time from like 10 a.m. Let's do, you know, maybe 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. And notice the change pushes the camera way back there. You can also click and drag the sun along this azimuth, right? The azimuth is the angle of the sun. And I can also click this bubble and move it further north or south. And now what I'll do, let's say we're happy with what we have. You've got your sun showing, your daylighting, and your crop box. And so now we want to start testing some renderings and see what we're getting here. So I'm going to go ahead and go down here, either to rendering dialog, or we'll go up here to the tea kettle. And we're going to click on the tea kettle. And this tea kettle is the rendering dialog box. These are the properties behind how we create a rendering. And these are where you can crash out your machine and change the effect of the rendering overall. So here I'm going to just change my setting. You can render regions too. I could just highlight this house and render a portion of it, but I keep it showing the whole thing because we could crop it out later in PowerPoint or something like that. So I usually run my tests under draft or low. And I run tests because I need to play with lighting, I need to play with entourage and materials before I really want to run something in the medium to high range. The difference in that is you're going to get more resolution, higher quality, better shadows, better reflections, all those kind of things. Then within there we have our lighting, right? Our lighting scheme can be many different things depending on your rendering. For exterior renderings you have sun, sun only, sun and artificial. We'll get into artificial lighting when we start to talk about interior rendering in the next video. Artificial only, where you can just place like these exterior lights and things like that, and no sun will be affected. Then you have interior sun only, sun and artificial only. We can even change more specific sun settings if we were in a different hemisphere or we wanted different atmospheric conditions. We could actually recreate other conditions from other planets possibly. Our background is where we can start to look at, do we have a sky with clouds, very few, very cloudy, so on and so forth. We can even place an image in here of what you want your building to look like in the background. However, typically you should stay within the no clouds to very few clouds range. This is because the more cloudy you make it, the more muddy your image starts to look. And really a good rendering tends to fall on some kind of shininess. It looks very fancy, so we stick in this range. So I'll go very few. You can even add haze where it looks like fog is in the image, but this should typically stay in the clear sense too. The next thing you do is run a rendering, right? When we test it out, you'll get a little dialog box like this. Shows how long things are taking, and then this little orange box here is chewing the image. And now you can start to see it's rendering out my little dock and boathouse, my trees, my skylights. You can even see some of my roofing openings showing inside of there. And every image it makes, once it makes an image, you can come in and you can adjust the exposure. The exposure is the brightness, right? So I can actually drag this slider, say apply, and the image will get brighter. But you want to be real careful with these settings. In fact, I wouldn't mess with any of these other settings. Exposure is the only one you should mess with. And always reset to default if you run into some issue. That way you can kind of work your way around. Exposure is very sensitive, so you got to take your time messing with that. The last thing you'll do when working with a rendering is you want to export the image, the final image, to somewhere. So maybe I'll export this to my Pictures or my desktop, but somewhere you'll remember it. That way you can place it on your drawing board later. And now you've got that done. Once you've finished a rendering test, you can go back, say show the model, and then we can start playing around with maybe zooming in on a detail and running another rendering. Notice how the more I zoom in, it might take a little longer because I have some artificial lights in here maybe. I also have some more materials and textures and detail. So you have to be mindful of what you're adding to your scene and what you're expecting from your scene. So there you go, you can start to see some of the more features of the building from the inside. And now each time you save these, I would suggest saving them just to the side in case you want to look through them later, because they're always fun to have a glimpse of. And so there's your basic exterior rendering tutorial. It's all about entourage, so placing, you know, these extra lights, these trees, features, making sure your materials are accurate is most critical. And we'll begin with our interior rendering tutorial next. Thank you.